that year that I went to West Side, Mr. Wakefield was in and out of my room all the time. And I just thought that he was just coming to check on his first year teacher. Well, it was not my first year teaching, but it was my first year working there. And he knew me well because I had graduated from West Side. And I just thought that he was coming to my room just to observe me because I was a new teacher for him. And I finally asked someone, did Mr. Wakefield come in their room as often as he seemed to have been coming to mine? And they laughed and said, well, you know, he's trying to decide who's going to be going to Hanna next year. And they said, they've got to send somebody who's good, and he's trying to find the right teacher to send to Hanna. I said, well, I don't have to worry. I said, he's just in my room because I'm one of his students, you know, and he's just trying to keep a check on me, and just laughed it off. Well, that summer, when I came back home, we would always go back to North Carolina during the summer, and we went back, when we came home for the beginning of the next school year, I got a phone call. The phone just ringing off the hook when I came in the door. And I said, this is strange, who's calling me? Who knows I'm already back home? And it was a former principal's wife who said, Mr. Wakefield's looking for you. And he's got messages out anywhere, whoever sees Margaret, to tell her to call me. And she said, but I'm going to warn you. She said, you've been selected. You're the teacher they want to go to Hanna. And that's what he wants to talk to you about. And see, it was time for school to open then. I said, oh my God. And I said, how in the world did he make that decision? She said, well, she didn't know. Well, after I talked to Mr. Wakefield, he said that it was certain that they did not want a teacher in a core subject. They wanted somebody in physical ed or music, or, you know, the library. They did not want a black teacher teaching their students a core subject. And they were determined, the blacks were determined that that's exactly what they were going to get, somebody in English, math, or science, you know. And he said that he was trying to find someone who was not so young as to be a little bit hot-tempered or whatever, and not so old that wouldn't be set in my ways. And so they were trying to find someone whose age was about right, and I was 30 at the time. And of course they were trying to find someone who would succeed, they felt sure would succeed. And I was at the top of his list for some reason. Now what reason, I don't know, except that of the candidates, I had been a student, and I graduated as Val of my class. And my daddy had taught with Mr. Wakefield also. So he knew my family very well. He knew me. And the other teacher was another teacher by the name of Margaret, who was on the list also. But he said he was offering it to me first, and probably I came out on top because I had just integrated the school in North Carolina and had been successful. So I had that under my wings. I'm sure that's about the only reason I, you know, was above the other Margaret, because she's such an excellent teacher. She still is teaching. She's teaching at Anderson College now. But anyway, he told me that if I would accept that, he would be with me all the way. He'd keep up with me daily, you know, and that they would make some concessions for me. He wanted me to go over and talk to Mr. Sandlin. So when I went over to talk to Mr. Sandlin, he told me that if I were unhappy, at the end of that year, I could go back to West Side. And he also told me that I would not have but 4 classes, whereas all other teachers had at least 5 in a conference period. And he would just give me 4 classes, and they would be all on the same level. He was trying to make it as easy as possible. I wouldn't have a homeroom, and I wouldn't have any teacher duties. Those were the concessions made for me. You know, like everybody else had to serve on lunch duty or whatever. I would not have any teacher duties except classroom, you know, teaching. And I agreed. I knew I would. Of course, it was quite a decision to make. I was really afraid because I grew up in Anderson, and I knew Andersonians. You know, I went through the whole gamut of, you know, segregation during my years here. So I knew it was. Well, I didn't think it would be easy, but at the same time, I said, well, if they've got that kind of confidence, I ought to try it. But it's still, I was kind of scared. I really was scared, and I didn't know. You know, so many schools had the violence. I didn't know how whites here would react to that situation. So I didn't go in, you know, confident that everything was going to be fine. I didn't have that kind of confidence. My attitude was that somebody's got to do it, and they think I can, so I might as well try. And I think the real reason I chose to go was because my husband encouraged me so. You know, he said, if they want you to do it, Margaret, you ought to do it, you know. And so I did. I did accept it. I told this in a poem. I was a contestant for Ms. T.L. Hanna in 2005, the year that I retired. And I told the story in poetic fashion. I was determined I'd never tell this story until I had left there. But anyway, that first day, we went down to the library where the meeting took place to be introduced, you know, the first meeting of the year. And I kept waiting. I was very apprehensive. Kept waiting for my name to be called just to know how I was going to be received. And I had sat at a table by myself, and eventually, after all the other tables filled up, I think one or two people came and sat at my table. But then, after the new teachers were introduced, and there were quite a few that year, I don't know how many, but there were quite a few new teachers, I kept wondering when my name was going to be called. I said, well, they're not doing them alphabetically, I was saying to myself. And well, they're not doing them by departments. How are they introducing these people? So I guess he was just randomly calling names, but he never did call my name. And finally, I was the last person to be introduced. And this is the way I was introduced. He said, well, and I didn't say who it was. I never tell who it was. I'll just say he was an administrator. He said, well, we've all known for a long time that this day was going to happen. It's here, and there she is. We don't want her here, but there's nothing we can do about it. That's the way I was introduced. And a few minutes later, after letting that sink in, he said, well, if any of you all want to help her. And he never finished that statement. That was my introduction to T.L. Hanna. And for that year, I was basically ignored. In my department chairperson was very cordial. But no one was outwardly sociable with me. I'd go in the lounge, and if there were one other person than me, they might say something to me. But if another person came, that ended that conversation. I don't think anybody else wanted anyone else to know that they would talk to me. But that was for that whole year. I didn't have too much interaction with anyone except the department, and that was just in meetings. The worst thing that I encountered that year were the meetings, the teacher meetings. And you see, they were trying to decide how they were going to send white teachers to the black schools. And nobody wanted to go. Well, I can't say nobody because I know at least one teacher volunteered. But there was hardly anybody who wanted to volunteer to go to an all-black school, especially West Side. I don't know what it was about West Side. And so every meeting that we had was, Lord, is it I? kind of thing. You know, who's going to go? Who are you going to send? If nobody volunteers, how are you going to make your selection? And so the majority of the meetings at the beginning of that year anyway were about who was going to go to West Side the next year. And those meetings were just horrible for me because I had to listen to my co-workers speak very honestly about how they felt about integration. And it was not very comforting to know that I was working with people who were educators and had such hostility against the opposite race for no reason, at least no reason that I saw. I began getting social invitations. And I got 2 for Christmas. And my husband again talked me into going, because I said, no, I'm not going. I don't know what those people have set up for me. I'm not going. But they were both invitations from people in the English department. And I felt pretty sure that I'd be fine. So we went to those. And then they started inviting me to a little card group that they had. And they would go from house to house. They would go from house to house about once a month maybe, I'm not sure. And anyway, they came to my house, and they were talking about visiting my house that Monday morning. And one teacher in the business department, bless her heart, old lady, heard them talking about what a good time they had that night, the whatever night it was, at Margaret's house. And she listened, and I was looking at her and chuckling, because I said, she can't believe that they came to my house, is what I was thinking. We were in the sign-out room. And the other teachers were getting the kick out of her because they knew how she felt. And so they started lying about the occasion. You know, they embellished the truth. And she finally said, what are you all talking about? I said, we were just talking about what a good time we had at Margaret's house. And she said, Margaret's house? What Margaret are you talking about? I said, Margaret Mack. And she said, you went to her house? I said, yeah. For what? She said, we went to play cards, and we went to socialize. They told what I had served them. And she said, well, where does she live? And they said, she lives in a nice, clean colored neighborhood. And when they finished, I had a mansion. I lived in a mansion. They had so much fun really teasing her about where they had been. But that was the second year, and things got better and better. I ended up being department chairperson.